The fluorescent lights of the diner hummed their sickly song as I wiped down the counter for the 100th time that shift. My hands were raw, cracked at the knuckles from the harsh soap and scalding water. 3 months of this. 3 months of 12-hour shifts, the smell of deep fryer oil clinging to my hair, and the crushing weight of knowing it still wouldn't be enough. Behind me, I could hear Tommy in the kitchen, cursing under his breath as he scraped the grill. The diner was empty except for 2 truckers nursing cold coffee in booth 7. It was nearly midnight on a Wednesday, and the October rain hammered against the windows like it wanted inside. I thought about the eviction notice again. The lawyer's words had been clinical, efficient, 30 days to vacate. That was 2 weeks ago. My landlord had stopped pretending to be sympathetic after I missed the second payment. My salary here, $3.50 an hour plus tips, wasn't covering rent, formula, diapers, or the medication my daughter needed for her asthma. There was no math that made this work. Mia was sleeping in the break room. I'd set up her portable crib between the boxes of napkins and cleaning supplies, her small chest rising and falling peacefully under her thin blanket. She was 4 years old, and she deserved so much better than this. That thought, that fact, was a constant ache behind my ribs. Tommy emerged from the kitchen, his weathered face creased with concern. He was good to me, as good as anyone in this dead-end place could be, but good didn't pay bills. Fine, I lied, forcing a smile. He nodded like he understood, but he didn't. Nobody did. The bell above the door chimed. The rain came in first, a gust of cold, wet air that made the truckers look up from their coffee. Then he walked through, and the entire atmosphere of the diner shifted. It was like a storm front moving through. The air itself felt denser, charged. He was tall, not just tall, but broad in a way that suggested power rather than vanity. His suit was dark, tailored to absolute perfection, and it hung on him like it was designed specifically for his frame. Everything about him was controlled, precise. Even the way he shook the rain from his dark hair felt deliberate. But it was his eyes that stopped me. They were steel gray, cold in a way that suggested they'd seen things that burned away warmth. When those eyes swept across the diner and landed on me, I felt pinned to the spot. I wasn't beautiful. I knew that much. My hair was pulled into a messy knot, my apron was stained with coffee and what might have been tomato sauce. There were circles under my eyes that makeup couldn't hide. I looked like what I was, desperate, exhausted, worn down. Yet he kept looking. He moved toward the counter with the casual dominance of someone who'd never questioned his right to take up space. A man flanked him, darker, broader, with the kind of stillness that came from violence postponed. A bodyguard. That detail registered with a spike of fear, though I couldn't articulate why. "Coffee," the man said. His voice was low, quiet enough that I almost didn't hear it over the diner's ambient sounds, but somehow it carried the weight of an absolute command. Black. I moved on autopilot, reaching for a clean mug. My hands betrayed my nervousness. The cup rattled slightly against the saucer as I set it down. I poured the coffee, watching how the steam curled upward, watching anything but his face. "You look like you need a miracle," he said. I looked up sharply. The comment was so specific, so pointed, that it felt like a threat disguised as observation. "I'm fine," I said, mirroring my lie to Tommy. It was becoming my default, a survival instinct. He lifted the coffee to his lips, and the ease of his certainty was infuriating and oddly hypnotic. "Your hands shake. You check that back room every 30 seconds. You're wearing the same shirt as 2 days ago. I recognize the stain." My face burned. The specificity of his observation, the fact that he'd noticed these things, was violating in a way I couldn't quite name. "I don't know what you want," I said quietly, aware of the bodyguard's stillness, aware of the 2 truckers pretending not to listen. "I know what you need," he corrected. He set down the coffee cup with deliberate slowness. "I'm not a thief," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut. He leaned back slightly, and there was something almost like amusement in those cold eyes. "I'm offering you a job, room and board, a salary." He paused, and I felt the impact of each word like a separate blow. "Your daughter's asthma medication is expensive." Panic spiked through me. I whispered. He smiled then, and it was the most dangerous thing I'd seen all night. Not unkind, exactly, but predatory in a way that suggested he smiled right before he destroyed things. "Someone who gets what he wants," he said softly. He pulled out his phone with one smooth motion and slid a business card across the counter. No name, just a number and an address in the Heights, the expensive part of the city where people like me didn't go. "Come to this address tomorrow evening. Bring your daughter." The question escaped before I could stop it. He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket with the kind of precision that suggested he'd had a lifetime of practice. The bodyguard mirrored the movement, creating a wall of dark suits and coiled threat. "Then you'll be evicted in 12 days, he said, and I felt my stomach drop, because he knew the exact timeline. "Your daughter will be in the system." He leaned down, not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive and nothing like anything in my small, desperate life. "My name is Dominic Russo," he said quietly, and something about the way he said it suggested he was a name people feared. "And you, Ava Chen, are going to come home with me." Then he straightened, pulled a $100 bill from his wallet without looking at it, and walked toward the door. The bodyguard followed like a shadow. I stood frozen behind the counter, the business card burning in my hand. "Tomorrow evening, pack a bag, bring your daughter." The bell chimed as he left, and the diner fell silent except for the rain and the hum of fluorescent lights. Tommy emerged from the kitchen, his face pale. "Ava?" But I wasn't looking at him. I was staring at the address on the business card, at the dark car that had just pulled up outside, at the expensive taillights disappearing into the rain. And I was thinking about Mia, about asthma inhalers, about eviction notices, about the fact that he'd said he would make it all stop. The rational part of me screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, foolish, impossible. But the desperate part, the part that loved my daughter more than I loved safety, was already imagining saying yes. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my apartment, the one I'd have to leave in 11 days, and stared at the ceiling of the bedroom I shared with Mia. Her breathing was even, peaceful. She'd had an asthma attack 3 days ago, mild enough that I'd managed it at home, but the inhaler was nearly empty. The refill would cost $200 I didn't have. The business card sat on my nightstand, and I picked it up so many times my fingers left smudges on the glossy surface. Dominic Russo. I'd Googled him at 3 a.m. using the ancient laptop Tommy had given me. The results had been sparse. A few mentions in business articles, a photo of him at some charity gala where he looked like he was tolerating civilization. Nothing that explained who he actually was, or how he knew so much about my life. The internet seemed to be protecting his secrets, or he was just careful enough to leave minimal digital footprints. By dawn, I'd made a decision. It was insane, absolutely insane. But insanity looked a lot like survival when you had a child depending on you. I called into the diner and told Tommy I was quitting. He didn't argue, just wished me luck in a way that suggested he knew I'd need it. I packed a bag with Mia's clothes, her favorite stuffed animal, a threadbare bunny named Chester, her medications, and the essentials. Everything we owned fit in one medium-sized suitcase and a backpack. How had I let my life compress this far? At 5 o'clock, I dressed Mia in her best outfit, a navy dress with white flowers that had belonged to my sister's daughter before Mia. I braided her dark hair carefully, trying to make her look like she belonged in a world like the one I was about to enter. She asked, her small fingers twisting the strap of her backpack. "On an adventure," I said, because I couldn't tell her the truth. That her mother was walking them into a stranger's house based on nothing but desperation, and the hypnotic certainty in a man's gray eyes. The address in the Heights led me to a mansion, and I mean that in the fullest sense. Not a house, A mansion. Black iron gates, a circular drive, lights hidden in landscaping that made the building glow like something from a dark fairy tale. The car I'd called for pulled up to the entrance, and I had a moment of pure vertigo. This was my last chance to turn back. I didn't. A man in a suit was waiting on the steps before I'd even fully exited the car. Not the bodyguard from before. Someone different. Older, with the kind of weathered face that had seen decades of service. "Ms. Chen," he said with a slight Italian accent. "Welcome. I'm Marcus." Marcus took my suitcase with the kind of deference usually reserved for royalty and led me through the entrance. The foyer alone was larger than my entire apartment. Soaring ceilings, a grand staircase, art on the walls that probably cost more than I'd make in a lifetime. Mia's hand tightened around mine. "It's okay," I whispered, though I had no idea if that was true. "Mr. Russo is in his study," Marcus said, gesturing down a hallway lined with dark wood paneling. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I walked down that hallway like I was walking toward judgment, Mia's small frame pressed against my leg. The study door was open. Dominic was standing with his back to me, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city lights. The view from here was staggering, the entire sprawl of the city, glittering and controlled from this height. He was holding a glass of something amber, and he didn't turn when we entered. "You came," he said simply. Not a question. "I had nowhere else to go," I said, and the honesty of it hung in the air between us. Only then did he turn. His eyes moved from my face to Mia, and something flickered across his expression, something I couldn't read. It might have been satisfaction. It might have been something darker. "This is your daughter," he said. "Yes." I pulled her forward gently. Mia stared at Dominic with the unblinking assessment of children who always seem to see through the masks adults wear. She asked. I felt my face flush. "Mia." "Yes," Dominic said, and he set down his drink and crouched to meet her at eye level. There was something almost gentle in the gesture, though gentleness seemed impossible in his frame. "I'm very scary, but I'm not scary to you. Or your mother," Mia asked. "An agreement." He stood again, and when he looked at me, his expression had shifted. There was something unguarded there, something vulnerable that made the dangerous parts of him almost harder to see. "Your mother is going to stay here. She's going to work for me," I asked. The question had been burning in me since he'd made the offer. "That depends on your skills," he said, moving toward the desk. On top of it was a tablet and a laptop, and I realized he'd already been working. "But for now, you'll manage my household. Schedule appointments, handle correspondence, organize events, administrative work. You'll have a room on the second floor." My throat felt tight. He looked directly at me, and there was something absolute in his expression. "You and your daughter both. Nothing will happen to you under this roof. No one will touch you. No one will hurt her." The words escaped before I could stop them. For a moment, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Then he smiled, that dangerous smile that suggested he was seconds away from doing something irreversible. "The word of a man who always keeps his promises," he said quietly. A phone buzzed in his pocket, and his expression hardened. He pulled it out, read something, and his jaw clenched. "Excuse me," he said curtly, and he was gone, leaving Mia and me alone in the study, surrounded by wealth and shadow, and the uncomfortable realization that I'd just handed him complete power over our lives. "Mama," Mia whispered, tugging my sleeve. I looked out at the city lights, glittering and indifferent, and I thought about asthma inhalers and eviction notices, and the way his eyes had looked when he crouched down to speak to her. "I don't know yet," I admitted. From somewhere in the house, I heard him speaking Italian in a voice so cold it could freeze blood. The words were sharp, violent in their brevity. A door slammed, and I realized, with a sick certainty, that I'd brought my daughter into a world where danger was just background noise, a natural part of the atmosphere. Behind us, Marcus appeared silently. "I'll show you to your rooms," he said gently. "Mr." As we climbed the grand staircase, I could still hear that voice from somewhere in the depths of the mansion, speaking in Italian, speaking in death. 3 weeks passed before I understood what I'd actually walked into. The first week, I'd been too overwhelmed to think. The second, I'd been learning the rhythms of the mansion, the systems Dominic had in place, the careful order he imposed on chaos. By the third week, I was starting to see the architecture of his world. He was a crime boss. Not explicitly stated, but impossible to ignore once you were inside. The men who came and went, the tension in the household before and after meetings, the way certain conversations would stop the moment I entered a room. I was useful, but I was also an outsider, a civilian who'd stumbled into a dark machinery and been given the illusion of protection. Mia had adjusted better than I had. Children were adaptable in ways adults weren't. She loved the mansion, the gardens, the fact that there was always someone to help her, food she didn't have to worry about. Her asthma had improved. The medication she needed was always available, no hesitation, no cost. She was happy. That was the thing that made this complicated. She was genuinely happy. I wasn't. I was terrified, attracted in ways I couldn't admit to myself, confused about whether I was an employee, a prisoner, or something else entirely. It was a Thursday evening when everything shifted. I'd been organizing Dominic's study, a task he'd given me that amounted to controlled access to his private life. Bills, contracts, correspondence. Nothing overtly criminal, but enough to understand that his money came from places that didn't appear on normal ledgers. He trusted me with his infrastructure, which was either incredibly arrogant or a calculated risk. He came in around midnight, and I should have left. Instead, I was still there, filing documents with the kind of focus that was probably obvious procrastination. "You're still working," he said. Not a question. I turned, and my breath caught. He'd been to some kind of meeting, and something about it had stripped away the polish. His shirt was partially unbuttoned, his tie gone, his hair disheveled in a way that suggested he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his expression that caught me, raw, exhausted, haunted. Exhausted. "I was just finishing," I started, but he held up a hand. "Stay," he said quietly. So I did. He moved to the bar hidden in the mahogany paneling and poured himself something dark. He didn't offer me anything. He just stood there, silhouetted against the city lights again, and I watched the tension in his shoulders, the weight he was carrying. He asked suddenly. I said carefully. He turned to face me, and there was something broken in that gaze. "Everyone wants to know what it's like to have everything. No one wants to talk about the fact that having everything means you have everything to lose. And He stopped, seemed to catch himself, seemed to remember who he was talking to. I asked softly. He looked at me for a long moment, and I watched the war happening behind his eyes. The part of him that wanted to tell me warring with the part that understood that vulnerability was a weapon, that information was power, that caring about someone was a liability. "I had a brother," he said finally. "Younger. We built this together. He wanted out." Dominic's hands clenched around the glass. "He tried to leave. The organization didn't accept resignations." I understood what silence meant. Understood it from the flatness in his voice, the way he couldn't look at me when he said it. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Don't be sorry for me," he said sharply. "Be sorry for him." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were gray and cold and full of something that looked like self-loathing. I didn't know what to say, so I did something that surprised us both. I walked to him and took the glass from his hands. Then slowly, carefully, I reached up and pulled the unbuttoned shirt gently away from his shoulder, revealing the skin beneath. There, in the soft light, was a scar, long and deliberate, the kind made by a blade. I asked. "I earned it," he said. His voice was so low I could barely hear it. I should have stepped back. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to maintain distance, to remember that he was dangerous, that I was vulnerable, that this moment of closeness was exactly how people got destroyed. Instead, I reached out and touched the scar with the gentleness of someone handling something precious and broken. He went absolutely still. "Ava," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like a warning and a prayer. I whispered. His hand came up, his large fingers gentle against my jaw. "I don't. I've done things." He stopped, and his thumb traced my cheekbone like he was memorizing the shape of me. "There are bodies buried because of me. There are families destroyed." "I know," I said. "Then why are you here?" "I am," I admitted. That word, that admission, seemed to break something in him. His forehead dropped to mine, and we stood there in the dark study with the city glittering below us, two people who should never have been in the same room choosing to stay. "I can't protect you from this," he whispered. "From me." "I didn't ask for protection," I said. His laugh was bitter. The moment fractured when the door opened. Marcus checking on him, his expression carefully blank when he saw me standing so close to Dominic. The spell broke. We separated. Dominic buttoned his shirt with mechanical precision. "Good night, Ava," he said, and his voice was back to being controlled, absolute, untouchable. But as I walked to the door, he called my name. "Get some rest," he said quietly. The next day, I understood what he meant. The men started arriving in the late afternoon. Not the usual business associates, but soldiers. Real soldiers. Men with the kind of hard eyes that came from having seen combat. They moved through the mansion like they were preparing for war. I tried to stay out of the way, keeping Mia in her suite with her tutor, but information leaked through the walls. Whispered conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. A phone call from Dominic to someone he addressed as father, his voice sharp and final. "They're moving." "What's mine?" I didn't ask myself what he meant by that. By evening, Marcus told me to keep Mia upstairs and not to leave the second floor under any circumstances. The anxiety in his usually composed voice sent chills through me. I was tucking Mia into bed when Dominic appeared in the doorway. He was dressed in dark tactical gear, and he looked every inch the monster people feared. But when he saw Mia, his expression softened. "Hi," Mia said sleepily. "Yes, Piccolo." She yawned. Something flashed across his face. Pain, maybe, or the weight of not knowing if he would. "Always," he promised. After Mia fell asleep, he found me in the hallway, and he took my arm gently, pulling me into a room I hadn't been in before. It was a bedroom, and I realized with a start that it was his. The space was Spartan, controlled, nothing like the rest of the mansion. A bed, a desk, a window looking over the grounds. "I need you to understand something," he said, his grip on my arm firm but not painful. "There are people who want to take what I've built, not because they can, but because they think they should. A rival family, the Cardonas." I asked, though I thought I knew. I should have been horrified. Instead, I found myself thinking about Mia, about how safe she felt in this mansion, about the fact that Dominic was willing to do terrible things to maintain that safety. I asked. His laugh was bitter. "I've been doing this for 15 years, Amore. I'll be fine." He moved toward the door, and I don't know what possessed me, but I reached out and grabbed his wrist. "Dominic," I said, and I used his name like an anchor. "Don't do anything that will make Mia see you differently. Don't let this business into this house." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the struggle happening in his eyes. The part of him that wanted to be ruthless, warring with something else, something softer that I'd glimpsed in the study. "I'll keep it away from her," he said finally. "For you." Then he kissed my forehead, just a brief touch of his lips, almost chaste, and he was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by Mia's bed and listened to the sounds of the mansion, cars arriving, men moving through the halls in organized silence. At some point around 3 a.m, I heard the word that made my blood freeze. Gunshots. muffled by distance but unmistakable once you knew what they were. Dominic was killing someone, possibly multiple someones, and I was sitting upstairs with his daughter, listening to violence bloom in the night like a dark flower. At dawn, he returned. I was in the kitchen, unable to sleep anymore, when Marcus brought him in. Dominic's shirt was torn, and there was blood on his hands. Not his, I realized when I looked closer. His expression was blank, the kind of emotional shutdown that happened when a person had done things that required them not to feel. He saw me and went absolutely still. "Ava," he said quietly. "So should you," I said. I walked to him, took his hands, and led him to the sink. I washed the blood away with warm water and soap, working methodically while he watched me with an intensity that felt dangerous. "You're not afraid," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm terrified," I corrected. When his hands were clean, he pulled me close, and I felt him exhale against my hair like I'd just given him permission to breathe again. "The Cardonas sent someone into the city to target people close to me," he said quietly. "They were trying to get leverage." I understood. He'd killed someone who was planning to hurt people close to him. People like Mia. People like me. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. He pulled back to look at me, his eyes suddenly vulnerable in a way that broke my heart. That's not something anyone has ever thanked me for before. "I'm thanking you for protecting her." He kissed me then, not like the forehead kiss from the night before, but a real kiss, deep and claiming and full of the violence and passion I'd been trying not to feel. His hand came up to the back of my neck, holding me in place like I might disappear, like I might choose to leave. I didn't. I kissed him back, and it felt like capitulation and choice simultaneously. When he pulled away, he rested his forehead against mine. "I'm going to destroy you," he whispered. "Maybe I want to be destroyed," I said. He closed his eyes. "Don't say things like that. Not when I'm bleeding someone else's life on my hands." But he didn't let me go. He held me there in the kitchen as the sun rose, holding me like I was the only thing keeping him anchored to humanity. 10 days later, Dominic called me into his office. It had become our thing, him summoning me appearing, and the careful dance we did around the electricity between us. During the day, I was his employee, managing his household, scheduling his life, maintaining the appearance of professionalism. But at night, when the mansion settled into silence, that changed. He'd found excuses to touch me. A hand on the small of my back when we passed in hallways, his fingers brushing mine when he handed me a drink, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, like I was something he wanted to devour. But he hadn't kissed me again. That line, once crossed, had been carefully redefined. He was keeping distance, I thought, out of some misguided belief that he was protecting me. It was infuriating. "Sit," he said when I entered the study. He was behind his desk, dressed in a dark suit, looking every inch the powerful man who controlled empires. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight clench of his jaw. I sat, and he watched me with an intensity that made my skin feel too tight. "The Cardonas want to meet," he said finally. "To discuss a truce?" I asked. "That depends," he said. He stood and walked around the desk, leaning against it in front of me. The double meaning wasn't subtle. "Dominic," I started. "Don't," he said sharply. "Don't tell me this is inappropriate or that we should maintain boundaries. Boundaries are illusions, Ava." He reached down and tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his gaze. "I'm willing to burn this entire city down if it means keeping you and Mia safe. I'm willing to make deals with people I despise." "You barely know me," I whispered, but my heart was hammering. "I know you better than I've ever known anyone," he said. "I know that you check on Mia 7 times a night. I know that you take your coffee with too much cream because you're still not comfortable enough here to drink it black. I know that you read mystery novels at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep because you're worried about what I am. I know that you have a scar on your left shoulder from a car accident when you were 16. How could you possibly? I have security reports on every person in this house, he said quietly. You think I'd let someone I didn't know completely take care of my child? I knew everything about you before you arrived. Everything. My breathing had become shallow. He was close enough that I could smell his cologne, close enough that I could see the darker rings around his pupils, close enough to recognize the hunger in his expression. You can't want me like this, I said. You can't want me because I'm convenient or because I'm here or because... He kissed me, cutting off my protest mid-sentence. It was aggressive and consuming, and nothing like the kiss in the kitchen. This was him showing me exactly what wanting me meant. A claiming, a possession, a statement of intent. His hand came up to grip my hair, holding my head in place while his mouth moved over mine, his tongue demanding entry, demanding surrender. I gave it to him. My hands came up to his chest, and I felt his heart thundering beneath my palms. When he finally pulled away, his breathing was ragged. "That's why I want you," he said, his voice rough. "Not because you're convenient, because when you're near me, I remember what it's like to be something other than a machine designed for violence and control." "Dominic, I'm going to meet with the Cardonas," he continued, his forehead pressed against mine. "And I'm going to tell them that the territory in the Heights is non-negotiable, because that's where I keep my daughter and the woman I love." "You don't love me," I said, but it was a plea, not a statement. "I loved you the moment you asked if you could stay for free," he said. "I loved you when you walked into my mansion with your daughter and desperation and hope. I loved you when you washed blood from my hands without flinching." He straightened and offered me his hand. "Come with me to the meeting, not as my employee." I should have said no. I should have walked away, protected both Mia and myself, chosen safety over this beautiful, terrible, dangerous thing happening between us. Instead, I took his hand. The meeting was scheduled for neutral territory, a private restaurant owned by someone with connections to both families. I wore a black dress that Dominic had somehow procured, something that made me feel powerful and terrified in equal measure. Dominic was in a charcoal suit, and he looked like exactly what he was. A man who could destroy his enemies with a word. The Cardonas arrived at 8, 3 men led by Vincent Cardona, the family patriarch. He was older, silver-haired, and he moved through the space with the confidence of someone who'd been powerful longer than Dominic had been alive. "Russo," he said, and I heard the condescension in the word. "Someone important," Dominic said coldly, "which is why I'm telling you now. The Heights is off limits. You don't move into it, you don't survey it, you don't look at it." "Such drama," Vincent laughed. "What's in the Heights that's so precious?" Dominic's hand found the small of my back, possessive and final. Vincent's expression shifted. He was studying me now, and I felt like I was being catalogued, assessed, filed away as useful information. His gaze lingered on my hands, my hair, the place where Dominic was touching me. "Ava Chen," he said finally, and my blood froze because I'd never told him my name. "Interesting choice, Russo." "I don't care who her father was," Dominic said flatly. "Her father was Marcus Chen," Vincent continued, ignoring Dominic completely. "He worked for the organization, cleaning up messes, handling problems." Vincent leaned forward. The room seemed to tilt. "He didn't," I started, but Vincent held up a hand. "He absolutely did. Russo, did she tell you her father was a rat? Did she tell you that he nearly destroyed the entire operation?" I looked at Dominic, and his expression had gone blank. That dangerous blankness that meant someone was about to die. His voice was quiet, which meant it was lethal. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I was 4 years old when he died. I don't remember him. My mother never—" "Your mother lied," Vincent said. "She changed your names. She disappeared into obscurity, and she raised a daughter who'd eventually come begging to a crime family for help." "Leave," Dominic said to Vincent, his voice absolutely final. Vincent smiled, clearly having accomplished whatever he'd come here to accomplish, and he and his men filed out, leaving Dominic and me in the sudden silence. He asked. I couldn't lie to him. My father died when I was very young. My mother took me away. She never told me why or how or what his connection to the organization was. I swallowed hard. Dominic walked away from me, and the distance felt like a physical blow. He stood at the window, silhouetted against the city lights, and I watched the war happening in his shoulders. You're connected to the organization, he said flatly. I'm not responsible for what my father did. No, he agreed. But you are responsible for lying to me, for letting me believe you were just desperate, just a single mother who needed help. I didn't lie about needing help, I said, my voice breaking. I didn't lie about Mia or what I was willing to do to protect her. Everything else was a lie, he said harshly. You're not an innocent civilian. You're connected. Then let me go, I said desperately. Let me take Mia and disappear. He turned to face me, and his expression was carved from granite. You think I don't know that? My heart shattered. Dominic, get back to the mansion, he said coldly. The drive back was the longest of my life. I sat in the back seat of the car with my hands shaking, understanding that I'd just destroyed the only good thing that had happened to us. Dominic's love had been conditional on ignorance, and now that the truth was out, I was waiting for him to make the rational choice, to let me go, to protect himself. When we arrived at the mansion, I found Marcus waiting with unusual tension in his weathered face. Ms. Chen, he said quietly. In the drawing room, a woman stood looking out the window. She was perhaps 60, with silver-streaked dark hair and a face that looked like an older version of my own. My mother. Hello, Ava, she said quietly, turning to face me. I asked, my voice barely steady. Because people in this world talk, my mother said. And when they talk about Dominic Russo letting a woman into his life, they talk about it. She moved toward me, and for the first time in years, I saw something break in her carefully controlled expression. I've spent my entire adult life trying to protect you from this. From him. From the organization. Tell me about Father, I said. She sat slowly, like the weight of the truth was finally too heavy to stand under. Your father was a good man, Ava. But he was a good man in a bad organization. He did terrible things he had to compartmentalize to survive. But he couldn't survive them forever. He became an informant, I said flatly. Yes, he went to the FBI and started telling them everything. Names, operations, structure. She looked at me with eyes that held decades of regret. Instead, he got himself killed. How did you... I found him, she said quietly. In our garage. I'd just put you down for a nap. You were so small, so innocent. She reached for my hand. So I took you, and I ran. I became someone else. Now you're involved with the man who essentially saved your life as a child, she said bitterly. The door opened, and Dominic was there, his expression dark and controlled. My mother stood immediately, and something flickered between them. Recognition, maybe, or old fear. Mrs. Chen, he said coldly. I'm protecting my daughter, she said. Get out, he said, and the absolute finality in his voice left no room for negotiation. My mother looked at me, and I nodded. She squeezed my hand once and left, leaving Dominic and me in the drawing room surrounded by expensive art and the wreckage of everything we'd built. I knew her story, he said, not looking at me. I had her investigated years ago, back when I first learned about your father, Marcus Chen, the rat. You knew, I whispered. I suspected, he corrected. He finally looked at me, and his expression was so controlled it was almost terrifying. Now I have to decide whether I'm willing to take the risk. My chest felt like it was being crushed. I understand. I'll go. I'll take Mia, and I'll disappear like my mother did. You're not going anywhere, he said flatly. "That's what you don't understand. Once I decided to keep you here, once I decided to love you, that became irrelevant. I'm not letting you go because some organization thinks they can use you against me. I'm not letting you go because your father made choices that have nothing to do with you." He moved toward me and I flinched instinctively. The pain that flashed across his face almost broke me. "I would never hurt you," he said, his voice raw. "Even now, knowing everything, I would never hurt you. You're not a liability, Ava." He reached out, and slowly, carefully, he took my face in his hands. "Your father was a good man who made bad choices," he said quietly. "You're his daughter, which means you have his strength and his conscience. That's not a weapon they can use against me." "You should hate me," I said. "I should," he agreed, "but I don't." He kissed me then, and it was different from the aggressive kiss at the desk. This was soft, almost reverent, like he was memorizing the shape of me, the taste of me. When he pulled away, his forehead was against mine. "I'm going to make a deal with the Cardonas," he said quietly. "I'm going to offer them something they want: money, territory, connections. In exchange, they're going to agree that you and Mia are sacred, off-limits, non-negotiable." He pulled back slightly. I wasn't sure if I was, but I nodded anyway because the alternative was losing him, and that felt like the only thing that would actually destroy me. The days that followed were a blur of escalating violence. It started with quiet conversations, Dominic making calls, pulling strings, consolidating power. But beneath the surface, I could feel the organization shifting, restructuring itself around the fact that I was important to him now. That made me a target. The first attack came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was with Mia in the gardens, watching her chase butterflies while a bodyguard, Marcus's choice, not Dominic's, which somehow made it worse, stood nearby. A car pulled up to the gates, and before anyone could react, gunfire erupted. The bodyguard covered Mia and me, pushing us behind the stone fountain as bullets tore through the garden. The peaceful afternoon shattered into violence and screams and the sound of return fire. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, though it felt like an eternity. When it was over, 3 men were dead. Attackers, I realized. The bodyguard was bleeding from a graze wound, but Mia and I were unharmed. Physically, anyway. Psychologically, I was shattering. Dominic was there within minutes, and the first thing he did was pull Mia into his arms and check her over for injuries. Then he turned to me, and his expression was so cold it hurt to look at. "This is what your father left you," he said, not unkindly, just factually. "I'm sorry," I said, but the words felt inadequate. "Sorry doesn't keep you alive," he said. There were 2 more attacks in the following week. One at the mansion's perimeter, one targeting a car we were traveling in. Each time Dominic's security responded with lethal efficiency. Each time he grew colder, more distant, more the machine he'd told me he'd become. I was losing him. It happened gradually, then all at once. The distance he'd been maintaining for safety became distance for survival. He stopped touching me like I was precious and started treating me like I was a bomb that might explode. He moved through the mansion like a ghost, working late into the night, making deals with enemies, consolidating alliances. One night I found him in his study with blood on his shirt. His own blood this time. There was a wound across his ribs, hastily bandaged, and he was moving like every breath hurt. I asked. "Meeting with the Cardonas went wrong," he said flatly. "But I made my point. Because I burned down one of their warehouses and killed their new lieutenant," he said without emotion. "I felt sick." "Dominic, don't," he said, and his voice held such exhaustion that it broke my heart. "Don't look at me like I'm a monster. I know what I am. I've always known. I was just hoping that loving you would make it better. Instead, it's made everything worse. Your presence here, your importance to me, it's destabilized everything. It's made me vulnerable." "Then let me go," I said desperately. He asked harshly. To being the cold machine? To not feeling anything? I don't want that anymore, Ava. I never wanted that. He moved toward me, and I could see the war happening in his body, the part of him that wanted to reach for me warring with the part that knew that soft things don't survive in his world. I'm destroying you, he said quietly. By loving you, I'm destroying you. I don't want better, I said. You want the idea of me, he corrected. The broken man who's healing through your love. But that's not what I am. What I am is a murderer and a criminal and someone who's killed more people than they've bothered to count. And if I keep you here, if I keep letting you love me, they will use you as a weapon against me. They will hurt you. They will hurt Mia. You always say that, I said, my voice breaking. Not forever, he said. One day I'll slip up. One day I'll be too slow or too tired or too distracted by the fact that you exist. And on that day, they'll have you. He turned away from me, and I watched him do it. Watched him physically pull himself away from me like I was a live wire that would electrocute him if he stayed too close. I want you to leave, he said finally. Take Mia. I'll set you up somewhere safe. New names, new identities, new lives. No, I said flatly. It's not a request, he said. But there was something broken in his voice that suggested he was begging me to make this easy for both of us. I don't care, I said. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were hollow. Even though staying means dying? Yes, I said. Because the alternative is losing you. And that's not survival, Dominic. He closed his eyes. Probably, I agreed. The night everything fell apart started like any other night. Dominic had been distant for days, the coldness becoming something more permanent. I'd taken to sleeping with Mia, both for her sake and for my own, avoiding the intimacy that felt impossible when he was so determined to push me away. But around midnight, I woke to the sound of alarms. Not the security alarm. Something worse. I got Mia dressed and downstairs, where Marcus was already waiting with a go-bag. He'd apparently prepared for this contingency. There's been a breach, he said quietly. Mr. No, I said. Ms., I repeated. Marcus's expression hardened, but he pointed toward the north wing. The security room. But it's not safe. I was already moving. The security room was in chaos. Dominic was there with his men, monitoring feeds, issuing orders, and I could see the problem immediately. Multiple breach points, coordinated attack. Someone had managed to get past all the outer defenses. They're coming from inside, Dominic said into his phone, his voice the cold calm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. This is Cardona. He's finally made his move. We need reinforcements at the east wing. He saw me and his expression darkened. Marcus, I told you. I wanted to know what was happening, I said. Before he could respond, the lights went out. The backup generators kicked in after a few seconds, but in that moment of darkness, I felt the shift. Something fundamental had changed. The attack had been a feint, a distraction while they cut the main power and made their real move. Explosions rocked the mansion. Get her out, Dominic barked, and his men moved with lethal efficiency. But it was too late. The east wing erupted, and the shockwave knocked us backward. Dominic grabbed me, pulling me down, shielding me with his body as the world came apart around us. I could hear gunfire, screams, the sound of structure failing. His arms were like iron bands, and I felt him murmur something into my hair, a prayer maybe, or an apology. When the immediate chaos subsided, he pulled me up. His face was cut, blood streaming down the side of his face from a shrapnel wound. Mia, I gasped. Marcus has her. Safe house. He was already moving, pulling me toward the exit, but Vincent Cardona was waiting. He emerged from the smoke with 3 armed men, and he was smiling like a predator who'd finally cornered prey. Russo, he said pleasantly. I've been waiting for this. Dominic pushed me behind him, and I felt him shift, transformation from man to weapon happening in real time. Run, he said to me quietly. Go to Marcus. Get Mia. He turned toward Vincent, and what happened next was like watching someone move through the world at a different speed. Vincent fired first, and Dominic was already moving, not gracefully, but with the kind of brutal efficiency that came from years of violence. He closed the distance between them like death itself. I should have run. I didn't. I stood there watching as Dominic moved through Vincent's men like they were nothing, dispatching them with a violence that was almost beautiful in its precision. But Vincent had a knife, and when Dominic lunged for him, the blade found skin. Dominic fell. The world seemed to stop. No, I heard myself say. No, no, no. I ran toward him, and Vincent grabbed my arm, pulling me close. His gun was pressed against my ribs. There we go, he said softly. Dominic was on one knee, blood blooming across his left side. He looked up at me, and there was something almost peaceful in his expression. I told you, he said quietly. Shut up, Vincent snarled. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to watch me take what you love most, and then you're going to die knowing you caused this. He started to drag me away, and Dominic moved. Even wounded, even bleeding, he moved like vengeance itself. He tackled Vincent, and they went down together. I scrambled away, and when Vincent's men rushed forward to help, gunfire erupted from the hallway. Marcus, with reinforcements, with soldiers Dominic had hidden, waiting for exactly this contingency. The fight was over in seconds. Vincent and his men were neutralized. Dominic was collapsed on the ground, and I was running toward him before anyone could stop me. Hey, he said weakly, and I could hear the blood in his voice. No, I said, applying pressure to the wound. You don't get to die. You don't get to tell me you're dangerous and walk that back by sacrificing yourself. Ava, shut up, I said fiercely. Just shut up and stay alive. You promised Mia you'd come back. His hand came up and touched my face, leaving blood in its wake. I'm sorry, he whispered. You did, I said, and I was crying now, the tears coming like a dam breaking. You protected us. You're still protecting us. Just stay. The paramedics arrived, Dominic's people, prepared for violence, prepared for blood. They moved him carefully, and I followed, never letting go of his hand. As they loaded him into the car, he squeezed my fingers weakly. Don't let go, he said. Never, I promised. The hospital room was sterile and white, and nothing like the darkness we'd come from. Dominic lay in the hospital bed with machines monitoring his every heartbeat, and I sat in the chair beside him, refusing to leave. The blade had gone deep, missing vital organs by centimeters. The doctors said it was a miracle. I called it luck that I didn't believe in. It had been 48 hours since Vincent attacked. 48 hours of watching Dominic sleep, of listening to the machines that kept him alive, of understanding that love wasn't a soft thing, it was the sharpest edge of survival. Mia was with my mother, who'd come out of hiding to care for her. They'd be waiting for me, probably worried, but I couldn't leave him. Not now. Not when he was still fighting to come back. He stirred around dawn on the third day. His eyes opened slowly, and for a moment they were unfocused. Then he saw me, and something shifted in his expression. Relief, fear, realization. You're still here, he said, his voice hoarse. I asked. He tried to sit up, grimaced at the pain, and stopped. Safe. With my mother. She's fine, Dominic. Because of luck, he corrected. Because you kept your promise, I said. I reached out and took his hand carefully, avoiding the IV. You told her you'd come back. He looked down at our joined hands, and I watched something break open in him, something that had been locked down for so long that its release looked like dying. I can't, he said, and the words came out broken. I can't do this, Ava. I don't need you to be anything, I said. I need you to be you, the man who kills and loves and bleeds and still comes home. It's not, he said desperately. You deserve safety. I deserve a choice, I said firmly, and I choose you. With everything you are, everything you've done, everything you'll do. You choose the fantasy, he said, the broken man I let you see. I know the reality, I said. I watched you kill Vincent Cardona to protect me. He closed his eyes. Probably, I agreed, but I'm foolish for you. His eyes opened, and there were tears in them. Real tears, the kind that suggested he was finally letting himself break. I love you, he said, and the words came out like a confession and a surrender. I love you in ways that feel like destruction. I love you with a kind of desperation that makes me willing to commit atrocities. I know, I said softly. I'm staying, I confirmed. He reached up and pulled me toward him, careful of his wound, and he kissed me like I was air and he'd been drowning. It tasted like pain and relief and a future we'd have to fight for every single day. When he pulled away, there was something softer in his expression. Something human. I need to tell you something, he said. Vincent was the last of the old guard, the last person who remembered your father and thought they could use it against me, he said quietly. With him gone, the organization has stabilized. The people who wanted to destroy me or question my leadership are all dead or displaced. That's good, I said. It means I can take you out of this, he continued. I can set you up somewhere safe, somewhere normal. I don't want that life, I said. I never did. I wanted this. I wanted you. Even though you're a criminal, I confirmed, who pays taxes and has legitimate businesses and tries very hard not to bring his work home. Even though you're a man who's dark and dangerous and loves fiercely. He smiled then, a real smile, not the dangerous predatory ones, but something genuinely happy and sad and grateful all at once. Marry me, he said. I blinked. Marry me, he repeated. Not because it's safe, not because it's smart, but because I want to spend the rest of my life knowing that you chose this. Chose me. Yes, I said immediately. He laughed, then grimaced as the movement hurt his wound. I didn't need to, I said. I've known since the night you kissed me in the kitchen. I've known through every threat, every attack, every moment you tried to push me away. He reached over to the table and pulled out his phone with shaking hands. With my help, he made 2 calls, one to his lawyer about drawing up a marriage license, one to Marcus asking him to bring Mia to the hospital. By the time Mia arrived, Dominic had asked me to bring him the small diamond ring that had been in his desk drawer. I don't know how long he'd been planning this, how long he'd known I'd stay, even when it would have been smarter to leave. Mia rushed into his arms carefully, mindful of his injury. You came back, she said. I promised, he said, holding her close. Then he looked at me. And I promised to stay, for both of you. That evening, sitting in the hospital room with my daughter asleep between us and the man I loved slowly healing, I understood something fundamental. Love in a dark world wasn't about being safe. It was about being brave enough to choose someone despite the danger. It was about looking at someone's darkness and deciding that their light, limited though it was worth every scar. 3 weeks later, when Dominic was strong enough to leave the hospital, we had a quiet wedding in his mansion. Just Marcus, my mother, Mia, and us. No grand ceremony, no elaborate dress. Just vows spoken in the library, surrounded by candlelight, and the understanding that we were binding our lives to something both beautiful and terrible. When Dominic kissed me as his wife, I felt the finality of it, the knowledge that there was no going back, that I'd walked into the darkness and I would never find my way out again. And I didn't want to. Because love, I'd learned, was the most dangerous game of all. It was the only thing that could make a man willing to destroy his world, and the only thing worth defending with blood. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. The mansion became home, not the kind I'd imagined when I was desperate and alone, but something better, something real. Dominic slowly healed, and as he did, the cold distance between us thawed. He smiled more, held me closer, let himself be vulnerable in small, precious moments. The organization continued, but something had shifted. With me at his side and Mia at the heart of the family, Dominic became not less ruthless, but more strategic. He moved away from unnecessary violence and toward calculated power. He wasn't becoming a good man. He could never be that. But he was becoming a man who had something to protect besides his empire. One night, about 2 months after the wedding, I found him on the terrace overlooking the city. The same view from the study, but he seemed different when he stood there now. I asked. That I used to stand here and see an empire to conquer, he said, putting his arm around me. Now I see a city I have to keep my family safe in. I asked. He kissed the top of my head. It's terrifying. But yes. As the sun set over the city, I held on to him, and I understood that this was my life now, not the quiet, safe existence I'd imagined as a desperate single mother, but something richer and darker and so much more real. A life built on the foundation of a love that burned bright enough to illuminate even the deepest shadows. We would face challenges. The organization would bring violence to our door again and again. There would be moments when I'd question whether I'd made the right choice. But every time I felt doubt creeping in, I'd look at Dominic and remember the moment he'd turned to face Vincent, knowing it might be the last thing he ever did, because he'd promised to come back to us. And I'd know that some loves aren't gentle. Some loves are a storm that consumes you completely. Some loves ask you to surrender not just your heart, but your safety, your sanity, your future. But when you find a love like that, a love so absolute and fierce that it rewrites the rules of who you are, you hold on. Because there are worse things than danger, and the worst of them all is living without love.